Welcome back to Engineering Civil Defense, where we are building the new civil defense. I'm DTH Rocket, and today we're going to be talking about what is this new civil defense and why do we need it? Well, if you're like me, you're probably really confused what's going on in the world. It's definitely not an easy feat being a citizen in the year 2024, 2025. You know, there's fifth generational warfare going on all over the world, which is this weird, yucky stew of new players and old players all together, traditional nation states duking it out on the geopolitical stage, corporations that are definitely players in the actual arena of conflict, and NGOs are pushing their own weird agendas. And now there's AI, which is nobody really understands. Everybody is fearing its development, and yet everybody is also trying to be the first to perfect it. And you know, you've got your traditional fourth gen extremist ideologies, terrorist groups, all that kind of stuff is still alive and well. You know, then there's the media, the legacy media, that they pretend to be objective, but really they are just propaganda for governments and corporations. Universities and public schools are also propaganda in a way. They're kind of just, I see them as factories for churning out the ideal worker for whatever the economy or the government needs at that time. Just perfect little workers that will stay in their lane and say, yes, sir, yes. All these things, they're just, you probably get this sense that all of these entities are secretly serving some higher power, whatever that may be. I think ultimately it's the devil, but whoever is kind of trying to be the master of this world, it definitely doesn't have your best interest in mind. So with so many different kinds of players and such a complex battlefield domain, multiple domains, you know, you've got land, sea, and air, and then there's space and cyber now. And then, of course, the biggest one of all is the psychological, or the battle for the mind. The citizens of countries are very much the battle space for that domain, because we've got social media, school I already mentioned, and ideology is. So navigating this battle space as a civilian, as a citizen, is a feat and a half. So that's why I'm here advocating for building our own networks and building our own defenses to protect the things that we value, our families and communities, you know, neighborhoods or local regions, churches, our way of life. And that's what the new civil defense is all about. I admit I'm using this term in a slightly new way. If you've heard this term at all before, it was probably in the context of the Cold War. You know, you had your duck and cover drills. You might also think of radio warning drills and community wardens that are enforcing air raid blackouts and all that kind of stuff. But the essence of the concept of civil defense is actually the organization of the people to minimize the threat of enemy action. And I think that is a great definition for civil defense. Within that definition, there is absolutely room for a combatant role. As harsh as that sounds, we are the last line of defense. Like I mentioned last time, relying on the government to take care of you for that is not going to go very well for you if America ever actually were attacked. A combatant role is absolutely necessary in the new civil defense, but it's only a small part. I think the larger part of it is going to be intelligence, networking, and logistics. But that combatant role is the missing component that traditional civil defense completely neglects. And I think as Americans, it's definitely in our national DNA, because our first armies were formed out of local militias and volunteers. So our existence as a nation is pretty much due to people stepping up to take up arms. So, I mean, after all, we are a government of, by, and for the people. So that's how we got our start. But you might ask, what about the National Guard? Isn't that fulfilling this function that I'm describing? Yes and no, but I'm going to say not really. Because the National Guard, I mean, it's great, but it's basically Army Reserves, in my opinion. The government figured out how to have a stateside standing army that is partially funded by the states and sharing that burden with the states. But if there's ever a national emergency, the National Guard is not going to be there necessarily to defend the state. I mean, yeah, the governor of the state can call out the National Guard, and that happens sometimes when there's a natural disaster or a civil unrest. But the federal government will tap that resource as it needs. Infamously, the National Guard was kind of used as a backdoor draft back in, well, several times, but most infamously in the 2003 Iraq War, where those people were sent overseas. How is that helping defend America from attack? I mean, weapons of mass destruction. Okay, yeah, sure. Technically, the National Guard falls under what is termed the organized militia. What I'm getting at is what is legally termed the unorganized militia, and that doesn't mean your group is slovenly or disorganized. It just means that it's not controlled by the governing officials, except in times of crisis if you submit to their leadership. So the law that defines this distinction comes from 10 U.S. Code Section 246. The militia of the United States consists of all able-bodied males at least 17 years of age and, except as provided in blah, 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 under 45 years of age who are or have made a declaration of intention to become citizens of the United States, and of female citizens of the United States who are members of the National Guard. So basically, everybody who is a citizen and is able to fight. And then the classes of the militia are, and here's where this distinction comes in. 1, the organized militia, which consists of the National Guard and the naval militia. And 2, the unorganized militia, which consists of the members of the militia who are not members of the National Guard or naval militia. So there you go. If a bunch of dudes, though, with guns get together, is that lawful? I mean, is it a gang or is it a militia, as defined in this U.S. code here? Well, to put it questionably, if they are blacks with Glock switches, then it's a gang. If they're overweight white dudes LARPing as Meal Team 6, it is a militia. No, there really is a difference. Gangs are in it for the money and the street cred and all that. And their loyalty would be to the gang, not to the community. So they don't really answer to the people. They answer to the mob boss or just whoever is throwing their weight around the most. They exist for illegal activity. They make money on drugs and what have you, prostitution and all that. That's why your group should be knee-jerk law abiders in all circumstances, even the areas you think have been constitutionally infringed upon. I mean, machine guns, anyway. But you really do need to, as much as you can, be law-abiding. I know that's next to impossible in some states, especially anti-gun states, but if you haven't moved to a free state in 2024, you have nobody to blame but yourself. So what should the role or mission of your group be? There are a number of directions you could go with this. Your goal could be to protect your state, but it may be too broad of a goal for your group because, well, I did some searching. I couldn't actually find any examples of a governor mobilizing the unorganized militia in a time of crisis, in modern times at least. So I think it's safe to kind of forget about that fantasy, like, oh, the governor's going to call us up and we're going to be attached to the National Guard or we're going to be attached to such and such and we're going to help defend our state. It would make a great movie. I don't think that's going to happen quite that way. But if protecting your entire state is still your goal, an alternative idea could be to petition your local legislature to enact or reinstitute a state defense force, which would be directly funded by your state and out of the reach of the federal government. So, for example, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a couple years ago, 2022, I believe, they reinstituted their Florida State Defense Force. And that actually saw some use in the Hurricane Helene response. So that could be one example, one option for you. Bringing it closer to home, you could set your sights on just regional defense. Have a regional network of smaller groups that are in communication, sharing intel, coordinating training with each other. Your goal could be even closer to home, protecting your own families, your own immediate community. You're not going to be out there patrolling neighborhoods and policing your community unless you've been deputized to do so, or if rule of law is so bad, so far gone that you're literally the last thing staving back the chaos. But I think that's also one of those delusional thinkings.
Well, everybody gets delusions of grandeur.
So you're going to have to figure out how to be effective with members dispersed across a geographical region. That's just how it's going to be. You're probably not going to find a bunch of members just in your own neighborhood, although that would be great if you did. So my own group has members dispersed across 4 or 5 neighboring counties. So your mission is going to be defined by such limitations. Staying ahead of the intel, figuring out how to stay in contact with your members, logistics, networking, those are all things that are going to be at the top of your mission, at the top of your list. So the question comes up, do you start a group or do you join an existing one? So first, check your local area for like-minded groups. That's what I did. I literally just searched the state I'm living in plus militia and clicked the first result. And it was, I was initially a little bit sketched out by the website, but slightly comforted by some lines at the top that were very boldly saying, we are not conspiracy nuts, we are not extremists, we're not a hate group, we're not anti-government. So those people need not apply. This was at a time when the FBI was infiltrating everybody's group and urging them to attack the Capitol or kidnap Governor Whitner or something like that. So I was slightly comforted by those lines. However, the phrase, show me the man, I'll show you the crime, comes to mind. If they want to shut down all those groups with the M word, they can probably find a way to do that. Basically, look for a group that has that commitment to being open and above board and legal as much as possible. So if you plan to start your own group, here are some considerations for how you might want to structure it. We have a staff structure, so that uses kind of the Army's staff structure. There are different roles defined in it. S1 is the administration, keeping track of the roles and attendance and member needs, etc. S2 is going to be a big one for civil defense, and that is the intelligence. There are many different directions you could go with that, but I suggest subscribing to S2 Underground if you haven't already. That is a great place to get started. And check out all his Intel Tradecraft videos. So that would be a great place to start. S3 is operations and training. So that would be coordinating all the activities for the field training exercises, the FTXs. We'll talk about that in a moment. And figuring out how day-to-day operations are going to run. S4 is logistics and supply. So this person will be in charge of the food prep and storage, homesteading in terms of civilian side, how are you actually producing the food. And this constitutes about half of our group because S4 is going to be probably the most important role in the new civil defense, because if you don't eat, you don't have a group. That's the basis for survival. The shooty shoot stuff, that's gonna be important for security, yeah, but the fundamental need is gonna be providing those logistics and supplying the militia. Then there's S5. I don't actually know what this does. It's called Civil Affairs in the Army. So we are civil, so I suppose we could flip it around and have a government affairs role. Maybe this person could be a liaison for communicating with your local sheriff's office or something like that. Then there's S6. Now that is the role that I fill in our group, and that is the communications and signals. So this is the person who will be in charge of making comm plans, setting the frequencies, and controlling ComSec, which I'm going to make a bunch of videos on this, so stay tuned for that. There are a few other roles, but those are the main ones. For instance, if your group is religious, you might want to have a chaplain. But that's the overview of a staff-structured militia, and it's not top-down. You're not going to be having a commander necessarily in times of peace, especially. If you're under attack and things are going sideways, then you might want to switch to a command structure. But until then, all your staff are pretty much equal rank and they're voting on major decisions. So other things that you might want to consider for your group. So how you actually run your group, what you actually do. I recommend doing monthly field training exercises, FTXs. Any more often than that, and it would be too much of a burden on your group. And any less often than that, and you're probably going to fall apart right away. Those FTXs are for training. So you'll identify a list of major things that you want to train: shooting, medical, survival skills, fighting. A lot of topics will come straight out of the Army field manuals. I also recommend reaching out to your local EMA, so get involved in CERT. That's a Community Emergency Response Team, and they're all across the country. And yeah, they're run by FEMA. I know there's lots of conspiracy theories about FEMA, but I went through this as a very good way of getting involved in your community, and that gives you a legitimate basis. That gives you some credibility, I would say. Then you'll want to draw up some bylaws. So bylaws they don't need to be detailed, but you'll need to just cover some of the basics about how your group will run. So your purpose, your mission, goals for the group, organizational structure, like that staff structure I mentioned, membership expectations, maybe some overview of your uniform and equipment each member will need, communication, what regular meetings you'll have, affiliations, code of conduct, all that can go into your bylaws. So all this comes down to the question, what is your mission for your group? That it'll be defined by your limitations, and this mission will define how you train. So it's good to identify as soon as possible, write it down, and refer back to it regularly so you don't veer off and do irrelevant things. So I'm going to end this video with a call to action. I'm going to end every video with a call to action, actually. So today's action items are: 1. Search for a like-minded group in your area. If no such group exists, then these other action items will apply to you. Tell a friend your plan. You definitely have a kindred spirit. Everyone does. Everyone should, at least. And that's going to form the backbone of your group. Then decide how you're going to get the word out. But by default, this will grow by word of mouth. And that is the best way to grow, because the news will spread to mainly like-minded people that way. Yeah, you can advertise online, and that could work. That's how I found my group. but it's more dangerous that way. And you don't know you want to find quality people that are going to be committed to your group, that are going to stay around and not going to waffle. That's the most difficult thing I've found about trying to recruit for your group. It's finding people who will be committed and not just, oh, I guess I've got this problem and I can't come for this or that reason. Yeah, stuff happens, but when you have a bajillion excuses of why you can't come to the FTX, you're gone. So then decide on your mission for the group. Are you going to prepare a bug out location? Are you going to create local networks? Are you going to interface with local officials? All those questions you got to think about. And then draw up those bylaws, create an SOP, start from Army field manuals. You don't have to create all this stuff from scratch. So many resources exist already. And that is it for today. This is the new civil defense, and it requires building, it requires creating networks. And I know this is difficult, especially if you're an introverted nerd like me, but that's why I'm out here talking to you right now. That's why I am inviting friends to join with me. So that's it.